Hello and welcome to episode 184 of the Mark and Me podcast. As always, I'm your host Mark. Now joining me on today's episode is the incredible film director Prano Bailey-Bond. She is responsible for giving us one of the best horrors in the last 10 years, an absolute masterpiece that I hope you've seen, the incredible movie Censor. It's an amazing horror, it's directed beautifully, it is everything that you'd expect from an unbelievable debut, and honestly, it's a work of art. If you haven't seen it on the big screen, go and check out the recently released second sight release, because honestly, it's got everything. It's beautiful. I've been spending this weekend watching all the extras, and it is just amazing. Hopefully, if you haven't seen the film right now, you will do this after today's interview, because Prano is an amazing, amazing person, and this has easily become my favourite interview so far this year. She's just adorable. She really is just everything. But before we get to that interview, let's touch base and talk about the last episode. On episode 183, I was joined by Brian Garris, the front man from the awesome band Knocked Loose. Such a great interview, such a great guest, and the response was amazing. So thank you for everyone that tuned in, and hopefully some of you are off to see them in the UK this week, because they're going to put on one of the best live shows you'll ever see. But today is all about Censor. It would easily make my top film of last year if I'd seen it last year. I've only recently just seen it, but it blew me away. So then when I had the opportunity to do this interview, I couldn't believe it, and it's a dream come true. So I want to get straight to it. So here's me and Prano talking all things horror. So Prano, thanks for joining me today on the Mark and Me podcast.
Thanks for having me.
What I want to do today is take it right back to the start. So tell me about those early films that you watched that made you fall in love with film, maybe from a very young age at the cinema or sitting with your parents, I don't know. But what was those first movies that you thought, my God, I absolutely adore film?
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up in the middle of nowhere in Wales in the countryside, and there wasn't a huge amount to do. It was beautiful. Incredible landscape that really inspired me. But my first contact with films really was my parents' VHS shelf, because there was no cinema nearby. The closest cinema was about half an hour drive, and there was one bus a week to get there. So
Wow.
I couldn't go there on my own, obviously, as a child. So I discovered this array of amazing films, and that's kind of what I picture in my head when I think of the films that, you know, got me into cinema and got me into storytelling. Those included Eraserhead and Blue Velvet. I'm a huge David Lynch fan.
He is a god.
Blue Velvet is a massive one for me in terms of, you know, my relationship with cinema and seeing that film and understanding what cinema could be and how it could venture in a kind of almost grounded way, but into something much deeper and darker, and the feeling that film kind of creates, and the surrealism of David Lynch's films was so inspiring. Also American Psycho. I mean, that was when I was a little bit older, got hold of a copy of that, and that lived in my mind for a long time. Tarantino, Evil Dead, and then other films like the Marx Brothers. I was really into the Marx Brothers. My Left Foot. I mean, it was a real mix of stuff on that shelf, a real eclectic mix.
It's amazing, really, because when I think back to my days, I live in Shropshire, so I didn't have the greatest, you know, it's like on Welsh border, so we didn't have like the cinemas that are around now, so I'd rely on my parents, but they might take me to like Blockbuster Video at the time, but I never had those sort of films. I was never allowed those. It was always like Back to the Future. But growing up in the 80s, I was lucky enough to see sort of like John Carpenter's The Thing quite early on.
Yeah.
And I remember that stuck with me. But the ones you've mentioned there, like some of the David Lynch stuff, I mean, that just showed you, didn't it, that film didn't have any boundaries. You could kind of do what you wanted. And I love the fact that David Lynch still does that to today.
Yeah, absolutely. And mentioning Carpenter, Dark Star was
amazing.
Was on that shelf. And I honestly think that film kind of helped me form my sense of humor, weirdly. I just found that film at once really unsettling and really funny and really, really strange. There's something so absurd about it. And that beach ball was an alien.
So good. I want to watch it now we're talking about it. I haven't seen it for
It
years.
is incredible. And to think that was his first film as well.
Mind-blowing.
So that was a big one for me as well. I adored that film. But yeah, I'm really lucky that my parents had such good taste.
I wish you had a like a photo of it now, like this classic whole bookshelf of films, because some of the stuff you mentioned there, my parents weren't even heard of. You know what I mean? You've got some
Yeah.
incredible foundations to build upon there.
Yeah, totally. I've got a visual snapshot of it in my mind. Everything was recorded off the telly as well. A lot of,
Yeah,
all stuff we'd recorded off the telly mainly. So I was massively into Red Dwarf as a kid as well. And I used to record every single episode off the TV on, Red Dwarf 1, 2. I had all the
amazing.
series, and I'd set the video timer to record because we couldn't, I didn't have loads of money to buy brand new videos and stuff like that. So
I was the same. I remember, like, I think it was like Thursday night at like 9 o'clock on BBC Two, and there'd be that, and then there'd be Bottom afterwards, and I'd be like getting absolute. My parents were getting meant at me because I've like videoed over like my mum's episodes of Brookside or something, but I was like using that little bit of sellotape over the line you weren't meant to go over, just so I could
yeah.
record them all and then watch them. But those were the great days, VHS, weren't they?
Yeah, and it's funny as well, that association you have with, watching something and knowing that Bottom came after it, and that kind of, the routine of certain shows and things like that. It is, yeah, we're in a different world now. It's quite funny to think, how much things have changed.
And I mean, you were, in quite a remote area, like you said. If you wanted to go to the cinema, it'd be a trip once a week, so that commitment would be too much. So when you kind of got that idea of how films are made, because when you watch them as a kid, you just love them, don't you? Because they're visual, there's sound, there's all these colours and everything. You just enjoy the performances, but you're not actually realising at a young age that, there's a production in this, there's a whole team of people, there's a director. At what age was it you were starting to click and think, actually, how are these films composed? How are these made?
I think I was quite young. I mean, I remember before I went to college, so it would have been when I was still at school in my GCSE years, I was reading books about filmmakers that I loved. I was reading David Lynch, books and Tarantino. I was really into Harmony Korine as well. And then I thought I wanted to act. I knew I was interested in, filmmaking in general. And I also painted a lot. I used to do a lot of drawing. So I was very much into kind of the visual aspect. But my mum was an actress, in the 60s and 70s, and had gone to RADA. And I grew up kind of, we'd be watching the TV and she'd say, oh, I went to RADA with her, or I went to RADA with him. And so I had this sort of understanding of the kind of people that would come together to make this sort of thing. And thought maybe I wanted to act. So I ended up going to college and doing a BTEC in performing arts. And while I was on that BTEC, I had my first opportunity to direct something, and I got to choose a play. I chose The Chairs by Ionesco, which is like an absurdist play. And while I was directing that, I realized that directing brought all the things I loved together. It brought together performance, it brought together visual storytelling. And if I transferred that off the stage, out of the theatre and into film, then it also included film. And I was so excited by this idea of constructing a story and having control over the sound, on a detailed level, having control over the image and creating meaning with those things. And so for me, from that point onwards, I knew I wanted to make films. And I'd also worked out from watching myself perform that I wasn't a particularly good actor. So I think I knew I could perform, but I wasn't transforming into this other character. So I think while my passion for being behind the camera or being the kind of driver of the story as a director, while that was growing, my enjoyment of performing was probably shifting. My idea of how good I was shifting.
So I take it your family were on board straight away when you started saying at college, doing your BTEC and everything, that the film industry was something you wanted to get into. As hard as it is to make a name for yourself in that industry, sometimes families and parents are very big on, it might not work out. You might need to get a proper job. Weirdly, I did BTEC Performing Arts as well. I didn't
All
think
right.
there was anyone else in the world that did it. I just did it because I wanted to play guitar and make films as a living, and it never worked out. But were your parents fully supportive? I mean, were they like, you can do this, we can support you, we know that, you can make a career out of this if you put your mind to it?
Yeah, I mean, my parents were the black sheep of their families in a
Yeah.
way, because they were both people, and we're talking about a different generation as well in terms of their parents. They were both people that had decided to become, my mum an actress, my dad was an artist and photographer. So they'd already followed their creative passions. We didn't have any money, like we were poor. But I suppose in a way, my mindset was always growing up that you do what you love. And so there was never a question, to be honest, in my head that, or in my parents' minds or anyone around me, it never seemed like it was a weird thing to go and want to do this. So I always had, support, which is great and really important.
And then obviously after you've completed your education and you're getting involved in doing some work experience, doing all these various different roles, when was it came about that you started to put pen to paper and write Censor?
Wow. So, I mean, I went and studied at university and came out and I worked in different jobs in the industry and was making short films and made music videos. And then I think I had the idea for Censor in 2012, but we didn't start writing the script until 2016.
Right.
It wasn't that we weren't working on it. We were batting treatments. I say we, me and my co-writer, Anthony Fletcher, we were batting a treatment, an outline for the film around, but I got distracted, I suppose, by wanting to make a short film that would connect slightly to the feature or would allow me to explore themes and ideas. And that was my short film, Nasty. So I was making that and it kind of postponed getting on to the script side of Censor. So we started properly writing the script for Censor in 2016, but I'd been making shorts and music videos. I mean, I made my first short, when I was on that performing arts course. Just me and my friends and me with a DV camera and getting my mum to use her car headlights to light the scenes.
That's incredible. So while you're making these short videos and music videos and short films and stuff, what was the point? I know we talked about a 4-year gap between obviously making Nasty and then putting pen to paper for the script. At what point was it that you felt confident enough to become your first full feature? I mean, you must have learned a lot from doing Nasty to then take on to Censor.
Yeah, I mean, you learn. I made probably about 5 or 6 short films and a bunch of music videos, and then I was also always doing little other side bits of filmmaking in one form or another in my work. So through all of that, you're really developing your skills, and I think over the course of those shorts, you gain, I guess, the experience you need in order to get on set and know what you're doing. I mean, the first feature feels like a hurdle because you haven't done a feature before, you haven't told a story this long before, you haven't been on a shoot this long before, and you're managing things on a slightly bigger scale, but essentially you are doing the same thing that you're doing on a short. When it comes down to it, the nuts and bolts of directing on set within a scene, directing the actors, kind of figuring out creatively how you want to tell the story, you're pretty much doing the same thing. You're just doing it over a much longer form, and so that's all really great preparation. I think you probably always don't feel quite ready, and then you're doing it, and then you're like, well, I'm doing it. So
when it came to that and you're on set and it's all been greenlit and the funding's there and you're like, this dream that you've had for a few years of writing and everything comes together, was there a moment when you were like, holy fuck, like this is actually happening, I'm on set? I know it sounds crazy, but was there a moment like you were like, oh my god, it's actually reality. Here I am, and it's all happening around me, because I can't even imagine myself getting in the headspace to be ready for that. And the scale you were working at, and the cast you had, and the production team, and everything was unbelievable.
Yeah, I think there are little flickers of that for sure, but to be honest, when you're in the thick of shooting, you're so busy, there's not that much space, to step back and look, because you're just dealing with the next, issue that's come up. You're dealing with the next question you have to answer, the next decision you have to make, and so it's really constant. And then you're in the edit, and it's very, it's quite an intense experience, the whole thing. It felt more like, to be honest, as I've moved away from having made the film, having released the film, it's moments like framing a poster of your film in your house,
Yeah.
and putting that on your wall, or receiving a copy of the Blu-ray release, and having that thing, to me, is, I don't know, there's something that really lands, like, wow, it's been years of work and now it's a real thing. I think maybe it's because those things are more recent and they're sort of stronger in my mind, that those are the things that where it's really landed, because there's so much insecurity in some ways along every step of the way when you're making a film. Like you say, will you get the money to make it? Will you complete this scene on set? Will you complete your day? Are you going to get everything you need by the end? Will the edit come together? Will all the sound and music work? Then once it's finished, will you get into the film festival? Will people like it? Will you get good review? It's kind of this constant cycle of hoops that you're jumping through and hoping that you're going to come out the other side positively. And so it's really amazing to kind of have completed it, and to yeah, it's there, and you can hold it and you can look at it.
It must be really hard to kind of sum up, but 2021 for you must have been absolutely insane, because you could never anticipate this film to blow up like it did. It won so many awards. I remember seeing pictures on the red carpet of Mark Kermode in one of the Girls on Top's teas. The fact that Girls on Top's produced the tea with your name on. Second Sight then announced they're bringing it out, and it made all the top 10 lists of the year. It's now already got like a cult status, even though it's so new. I don't know how you could even get your head around just how much of a debut this has had, and the response was just unbelievable.
Yeah, it was amazing. It's kind of everything you've dreamed of, and also at the same time, it's quite hard to get your head round.
Yeah.
There's moments, it's similar to what we were saying about the shoot and things. There's moments where it really lands, and I think there was one moment for me where the Sight and Sound cover that was all Video Nasties, that had been released, and I'd seen it. I saw it before it was released. I had a copy, and it wasn't until I was like moving around my house, hoovering, and saw a copy of Sight and Sound on the floor that it kind of clicked, like, wow, we're on the front cover of Sight and Sound. It's almost like the thing doesn't land in your mind in that moment.
No.
It kind of comes a bit later when you're least expecting it. I find that really interesting, but it's really incredible. And every message I get that of people saying lovely things about the film, and all the comments and things have just been really lovely. And it's so nice to think that we created something that people can enjoy this much.
And as a filmmaker, I'm not obviously one, but what my dream would be, I mean, if I was an artist in the music industry, I'd want a #1 album. As a filmmaker, I'd always want my work to be, a couple of years ago, probably like as an Arrow release, an Arrow video release. But Second Sight have come along, and the way that they treat these films, stuff like Lake Mungo and all these classic horrors that people need to know about. The fact that you can now go to your shelf, I suppose like your parents' shelf, and have your version of your film in the most beautiful packaging, the artwork, the extras, they put all the time in that I think, unfortunately, distribution companies aren't doing as much now. You just buy a Blu-ray and it's got the film in the trailer. But these guys go to town and give you commentary, which I absolutely adore, behind the scenes, all the outtakes, everything.
Mm.
And now you're part of that collection next to Dawn of the Dead, next to all these incredible films like The Guest, and it must feel unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what I mean. Somebody posted a photo on social media, and it was of all their second sight releases in a row, and it was sort of, Censor next to Raw, so all these amazing films, and I thought I screenshotted it. I was like, that's absolutely lovely. It's a dream come true, and Second Sight have been so collaborative as well in terms of the artwork, and all of us having a kind of vision for what this Blu-ray could be. And I love the artwork, the cover artwork.
It's incredible.
I've framed my little card that I got with it of the artwork. Actually, I know it's too dark, and this is podcast, so but yeah, I've framed it, and I just, it's gorgeous and so in depth and really, really stunning, really beautiful.
I mean, where do you go from this? The debut release is always the one that, leaves your legacy, sets the bar high. You couldn't set it much higher for yourself to try and achieve. So where do you kind of go next? Did you want a bit of a breather and just to kind of digest and take everything that's happened, or are you already sitting there ready to kind of go for this year and do something else?
Well, last year was very like Censor centric.
Yeah.
And even though I was starting to work on other projects, it was hard to find this headspace really to actually write anything else. So this year I've got a bunch of projects that I'm writing. So I'm deep in the first draft of another script already.
Wow.
And yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting to be writing new material. Obviously, there's also the wanting to make sure it's as good as the last thing. But I think that's every creator's dream and nightmare at the same time, isn't it? But it's exciting to move on to other things and dream about what the next project could be.
Was there, because obviously you wrote this and then directed it and it's your material, do you entertain the idea already this soon into your career of working on someone else's script and someone else's story, or are you more invested in the fact of producing everything yourself at this point and being in control?
Well, what I'm working on at the moment, I'm co-writing with my co-writer from Censor.
Yeah.
That's actually an adaptation of a short story. So that's already moving into a territory that's not entirely coming from an original idea. However, all the other projects I have currently lined up are original ideas. I am reading scripts, and I am open to working on scripts that are already written. I mean, it would be lovely and amazing to find a script that already existed that I didn't have to spend months or years like agonizing over at my desk. But I guess it's all about what you want to say and the way you want to say it, and finding that material that really makes you, driven, like that kind of gives you a heart attack and makes you go like, I want to make this. Oh. And it's hard to find that sometimes in existing scripts.
Yeah.
I think I'm slightly more inspired by literature. So adaptations are exciting. But yeah, I my thing is never say never. So I am always like open. At the moment I'm not reading that much in terms of other scripts because I need to concentrate on writing, but I do read scripts that are sent in to my agent, trying to find something that might click.
And a lot of my friends that are in the film industry that discuss making films, and people that listen to the podcast that are filmmakers or, studying at the moment at film school, they truly idolize you for the fact that you've made this film. I've had conversations with my other podcasts, and they voted your film as Film of the Year, and they literally adore you. And what advice do you give to people that already want to try and become like yourself and make a film and stand above everyone else and get this work seen, because we are in an industry where everything's so disposable, with music on Spotify and films on Netflix. The kind of, I don't know, I think the attention span of people is very like, oh, I'll watch it, and if I'm not fancy, I'll just delete it. It's that sort of thing. What advice do you give to people that are trying to get out there and get their work seen when it is so difficult to kind of be seen at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to that because I felt for a long time trying to get, my short films funded and made. Often felt like the ideas I was putting forward weren't the ideas that anybody wanted to make, and I'd go for funding and get rejected. And I think ultimately there was a passion and a sort of fire in me about making those particular ideas that meant I'd just find a way to do it anyway, whether that means doing it on like 150 quid with your friends. However you can make it, just go and make it. Do it the way, sometimes your limitations can actually make you make something in a really unique way. It means that you find ways around problems, and you might find that it pushes you into more creative solutions. So I would say just try and find a way for you to tell your stories, even if it's on a tiny budget. When I was like working like that, for example, I remember finding locations and thinking, oh, I've got access to this location, I'll write something that fits that location, because I'm not writing something set in a spaceship or a castle that then I'm trying to find the money to afford the location. It's like looking around at what have I got here, within my means, and trying to create with that. And it doesn't mean you have to do stuff that's mundane and everyday, because the things I was creating, were quite larger than life and stylized. It's just about being really clever with how you find your resources, and also finding good people to work with. So finding collaborators who are driven and want to do either, your mate who wants to make costume, your mate who wants to be a cinematographer. If you're growing together, you're all passionate, you're all going to put that time in because it's serving all of you. So I guess that was how I did it. And it is hard because there is a lot of rejection along the way, but that is also true to many people, including me. So it doesn't mean that your ideas aren't good. It just might mean that that person can't see how great your idea is. So you have to go and show them.
I've asked that question to over 180 people, and I think that's my favourite answer. And now it inspires me to like quit my job and go and do what I want with passion and hope it's enough.
Maybe don't quit your job. Just
yeah. My girlfriend gets home tonight and she's like, "We can't afford the mortgage, but hey."
Exactly.
And my final question I ask this to everyone that comes on the podcast, and it is putting you on the spot, is the outro to every single episode of the podcast features some music. Now, the music itself can be chosen by the guest who's on the podcast. So for everyone that's been on, if it's Mads Mikkelsen, Kevin Smith, Sherilyn Fenn, whoever's been on the podcast, they all get to choose the outro piece of music. But I don't give you long to think about it. I don't let you come back and email me. It's today. So what song would you like that means a lot to you? It can be any song by any band in the whole world. It could be a piece of music from a film score. I find directors find this difficult because there's so much to choose from. But is there something that when I ask you today, after all the interviews polished, it's all edited and it goes out on Spotify and iTunes and everything, what would you like that to be for you today?
Just for fun, and to go back to my teenage drum and bass roots.
Wow.
I'm going to choose Super Sharp Shooter.
I have not heard that for so long.
I haven't either. It was just like, that was the thing that came to my mind. It was weirdly, it's between that and a Donovan song.
Wow.
Which is like two extremes. But I think Super Sharp Shooter has a little bit more fun and energy to it. So let's all just have a dance.
The thing is that everyone now won't be expecting that, and then this will come on, and then I'll suddenly see loads of people tweeting the album cover and say, "I'm listening to that again. I can't believe it. It's been 25 years or what? It would be probably more now, which would terrify me."
Yeah, totally.
It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. I'm a massive fan of your work. I can't wait to see where you go next. I'm kind of excited but teased by today because I know that you're penning a few ideas and there's all this and you're writing with the same person again. So it's like, oh, you've juiced me up and left me kind of dangling. But I'm really excited and I'm happy to own the Second Sight set. I can't wait to see the response online and just... I'm so excited to see where this career goes for you because the mark you've already left in the horror community and the world of film already has been unbelievable. So thank you for joining me today.
Oh, that's so lovely. Thank you for having me.
So there it is. There's my interview with me and the incredible Prano Bailey-Bond. What an amazing person and such a thrill for me to speak to. I am so honoured that she came on the Mark and Me podcast and I felt that we could talk for hours, so I'm really hoping we can get her back on in the very near future. She teased us throughout, we found out about writing new films, working on scripts, and I can't wait to see the announcement when we find out what the follow-up will be after the amazing debut of Censor. If by the time you've listened to this interview you still haven't stopped or paused this and gone and got yourself Censor, do it right now. Second Sight, who put all the love and effort into every single release, have just brought out Censor. It's an amazing package, the artwork is incredible alone, the extras are all amazing, and I'm not paid to say this, it's one of my releases of the year, and yes, we're only in February, but Second Sight really know how to look after the fans, and it really is worth every single penny. I want to say a massive thank you again for Prano for coming on the show, and you're welcome whenever you want to come back on. Hint, hint, let's do it real soon. Also, if you've enjoyed today's episode, jump on markandme.com because on there's links to Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. I say this every time because it's crucial to the podcast. Please share this episode. It costs nothing to do. It's a click of one button to retweet or share it on Facebook or Instagram stories, and it might just get seen by a whole new listener that then jumps on board and falls in love with the podcast. It's the best way to market the podcast, and it's simply the press of one button and costs you absolutely nothing. So please, if you've enjoyed today, get that episode shared. If you really want to support the podcast, I do have a Patreon page. Every single month, thanks to the sponsors of the podcast, Last Exit to Nowhere t-shirts, Richer Sounds who sell incredible TVs and hi-fi, and the amazing Vice Press who, in my opinion, are the best company out there right now for all your movie posters, all come along and give me some exclusive prizes to say thank you for supporting me on Patreon. The link is on markandme.com, but basically, if you're new to Patreon, all it means is each and every month you can throw £1 this way. That's the minimum donation, but that goes right back into the production of the podcast, allows me to host it on all these different directories, travel the UK to do more and more interviews and keep the podcast going. Remember, I'm a one-man team. I'm the editor, the producer, I do the interviews, I find the interviews, I don't have any management or support, so it really does help. And thanks to those guys that I just mentioned, there'll be some exclusive prizes available just for you guys for supporting me. So please, if you've enjoyed today, it is not very much money at all, but it goes a massive way. I'll be back in only a few days' time with a brand new episode. So until then, go and watch Censor, share this episode, look after yourself, and I'll speak to you all very soon.
Check it. Super sharp shooter shooting shots. 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 I'm the fucking man who the match it. Check it. I'm the fucking man who the match it. Check it. I'm the fucking man who the match it. Check it. I'm the fucking man who the match it. Blazing the stuff that ain't laced if you're lazy. Super sharp shooter shooting shots.